խոսակցությունը նելու է Վլադիմիր Բելոգոլովսկի ղեկավարությամբ երբ խոսքով ասեմ ով է Վլադիմիր Բելոգոլովսկի վստահ եմ մեծամասնությունը գիտի տեսել է իր ինտերվյուներից կարդացել է 500-ից ավել ճարտարապետների ինտերվյու հարցազրույց վերցրել Վլադիմիրը համադրող է քննադատ կազմակերպել է 50-ից ավել միջազգային ցուցահանդեսներ մինչև օրս հրատարակել է մի քանի գրքեր, հավաքածուներ, մի քանի արվեստանոցներ տեսել են նույնիսկ այդ գրքերը այստեղ տպագրվում է Art-Delium, The Architect's Newspaper-ում, Azure, Steer եւ այլն շատ ու շատ հանրահայտ եւ կարեւոր ճարտարապետական հանդեսներում դասավանդել է 30-ից ավել երկրների համալսարաններում եւ մենք շատ ուրախ ենք, որ Վլադիմիրը համաձայնվեց մասնակցել մեր այս փառատոնին եւ այսօրվա խոսակցությունները վարել իսկ այս պանելի խոսնակներն են Yuri Grigoryan-ը Meganom ստուդիայի ղեկավար հիմնադիր Todd WOJR ստուդիայից Ամերիկայի Միացյալ Նահանգներից եւ Morten Johansson-ը DinellJohansson շվեդական ճարտարապետական կազմակերպությունից Ստոկհոլմից այնպես որ խնդրեմ սկսեք thanks
Well, thank you, Haik. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to this talk. Yesterday was, I think, a great presentation of 3 incredible practices. I really enjoyed those, discussions and presentations. I like the fact that the projects were very, very diverse and the positions were very different. And now I would like to, start with some questions. But before I do that, I would like to reflect just a little bit on, this place and where we are right now in the profession, in the discourse of architecture. And, let's start with the name, Common Ground. So Common Ground, for those who are architects, and I think most of the people here are architects, would agree that Common Ground has a very strong significance for the profession because of 2012. I almost said Olympics. The 2012 Venice Biennale, when David Chipperfield asked this question for the first time, what is our common ground? There was no question mark, but he really meant to add the question mark because nobody knew what common ground was, and nobody seemed to care why we even needed common ground. And that was a reflection on the previous 15 years in architecture, starting from, I would say, 1997, exactly 15 years before that, when Guggenheim Bilbao was built, designed by Frank Gehry. And that really, I think, became a singular explosion in the profession when it was almost ground zero for the profession, because from now on, I think all architects agreed that anything was possible. And for the next 15 years, we all seem to believe that anything is possible. And all those architects started exploring different ideas, contradictory ideas, everybody going into different directions, trying to reinvent what architecture was. That was before the question was asked. And in my opinion, 2012 turned that whole exploration around, and very different questions started to be asked. For example, I interview architects for quite some years, and I realized that it was very easy to talk in the very beginning, to ask different questions about their personalities, about their ideas, personal explorations, and they would be very eager to talk about it. After this question was asked in 2012, what is our common ground? Architects started to look around to each other and really became much more timid about being individuals. They started asking very similar questions. And in the beginning, nobody knew the answers. For example, in 2014, Rem deconstructed the whole scene. His biennale was called Fundamentals. So he made a whole series of catalogs of different windows and doors and roofs and facades. And it was all, taken apart, probably in hopes that someone else would pick it up 2 years later. And that was Alejandro Aravena in 2016, who called his biennale Reporting from the Front. And that's when the new purpose, new common ground was found, 2016. So that was 8 years ago. And the common ground was, in pragmatism, in problem solving. And that became the focus of many architects. So I'm kind of trying to fight that. I'm trying to bring some discourse and questions. And in a series of these questions that I'm going to ask, I will try to get away from any kind of consensus, any kind of agreement, any kind of assurance what we need to do and how to build a good building. Because I want to know what a good building is, and I want to hear very different answers, very different responses. And so we have 3 architects here today, and let's compare. We're actually going to have more in the second session. But to begin with, I want to say that I really don't think we need a kind of goal overall. I think each architect needs to set it up, but it's okay for them to go into very different directions and personal directions. So my purpose is to kind of pinpoint the differences and pinpoint connections and ask the questions and hear and kind of celebrate very different answers. But to begin, I think if you, like each of you, maybe we'll start from Yuri, because he's actually kind of, it's kind of his home in a way. And I want him to maybe say a few words about his practice, his milestones. In just a few words, what would you say are your major achievements in the profession? What have you done that you are really proud of?
Yes. Thank you very much, Vladimir, and thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor, it's a pleasure. What I can say about my background, that we started from a really commercial project, small, and then it was growing. And I think that my potential achievement, I have no achievements, honestly. I am honest now. It's not like a pose. But my bigger hope is to run from this. I mean, to go to self-initiated projects. That's what we are trying to do in the field of education, in the field of research. And I had the interesting conversation because we will have a week of Italian architects in October here, even several weeks, maybe 3, in LFA. And I was asking Fosbury leader, and she said that they came to the profession around millennium, and it was completely stuck, everything in Italy. And she had no work, and they started with the research and education and the exhibition projects, curatorial projects. We're doing vice versa. We start from commercial projects, and we are moving to, let's say, marry our educational initiatives, self-initiated projects, research in something new. And it's not a revolution, it's our personal movement. And this is what we are looking for. This would be my answer for this.
And John, so you coming from a very different place, Cambridge, Massachusetts. If you could say a little bit about your practice and what are some of the milestones that you have achieved so far?
Well, thank you so much for the question. So we are a relatively young office based in Cambridge. We come out of my partner Liam and I both are outcomes of the GSD. He teaches at MIT down the road. And I think we are practiced very much engaged in the world of academia, both in terms of just our CVs and histories, but I think also just internally to our practice, we I think are interested in the questions of architecture and almost treating each project that we undertake as a form of research, whether that is a commission project that someone hopefully pays us to do, or it's something that a question that we are in a practice or in a project that leads us to new questions and that we undertake in our own free time. We're lucky enough to be starting to have work that's built. We just completed a house that's been going on for 7 years in California.
A private house,
yeah,
right?
Private house, yes. And I think we're just really excited by every little project that we do, that provides.
And Morten? So you come from Copenhagen, a very different place.
No,
and
I'm
you were actually
from Stockholm, actually.
Oh, sorry, Stockholm, sorry. And you actually complained a little bit about certain limitations for exploring architecture. If you could expand a little bit, but at the same time, how you are able to overcome that.
Yes, thank you for the question. About your introduction, I'm afraid I'm one of, and we are one of those architects who are of that timid version, trying to be problem solvers. But then, and basically accepting also any commission that someone comes with, we're accepting almost everything. At least if it's a friendly person asking, whatever the project is. And then of course, the problem-solving part is full of friction, because somewhere we're architects. We're not engineers. We're not solving problems like engineers. So we have to solve also the problems which you cannot measure, if you like. That's probably why I'm complaining, because it's easy to say that architecture is just about solving problems posed to you by a program for something. But it's much harder, because in the end, what you want to do, and what actually the client is also asking of you, is to sprinkle a little bit of magic over the result. And that's a struggle.
So let me ask you, and we'll go from you to John and Yuri. After that, when you started your lecture yesterday, and you haven't been to the lecture, so Morten presented his work. He opened his work with some of the projects by Labyrinth, Swedish architect, and he described his, fascination and admiration for his work. And I wonder if each of you, so you already talked about labyrinths, but if two of you, John and Yuri, could talk about maybe another architect. Because what I also didn't mention is that I think it's a good opportunity to actually learn something from our speakers today and reflect on that knowledge. And if you could share, who that figure would be. Is it a historical figure? Is it somebody who is practicing today? And what is it exactly that you are trying to learn from that figure? And how does that enrich your own architecture? So starting with John.
I'll try this one. I think quickly that comes to mind is Toyo. I had the luck and privilege of being able to study with him and work with him a few years ago. And besides just being a very humble and kind human being, given who he is, just his narrative as a practitioner. If one is not familiar with his kind of body of work, he started out in the late 60s, early 70s, very much an acolyte of Shinohara. At some point, he kind of came to the conclusion of that project and became very interested in ideas of transparency, of the disappearance of architecture, architecture in the digital age, really in the kind of nomadic existence of being in the city and being a consumer in the boom 80s of Japan. A lot of that project, is carried forward through offices like Sana. Sejima worked with him and was part of that phase. And I remember he had a story saying during the construction of the Sendai MediaTek, kind of his first building at that scale. And he was walking through the construction site, and it's this building that has these like beautiful, complex framework columns and these very, very thin slabs of concrete, kind of that use shipbuilding techniques in order to achieve it. And his intent going into the project was, the thinness of the floor plates and the disappearance of the architecture. But when he was in the construction site, he was confronted by the massiveness of everything. And he realized that this project that he's been working on for 20, 30 years is wrong. And he was able to just completely pivot and accept that certain projects have certain lives. And then he engaged in a period of projects exploring structure and the kind of richness of space produced through the kind of massiveness of architecture. But then with the tsunami in Japan, he had another kind of reckoning moment, confronted with the devastation of the tsunami and the loss of life and people's loss of homes, and really, for him, realized that so much of these heroic and beautiful structural projects, for him, he felt were about the ego of the architect. And what really mattered was people's lives. And I remember seeing him a few years ago give a lecture at the GSD, where he was showing a recent project, the Gifu Library. It's a beautiful project. It was in design when I worked at the office. And the entire time, he kept showing pictures of people having picnics inside. And that you could tell he was so delighted by that. And that's what he cared about. And I think that is such a beautiful lesson for architecture, that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to question your capital P project and change.
Yeah, the metaphor for Sendai MediaTek is the forest. And that's a beautiful metaphor for architecture. And when I interviewed him, he said, wind and clouds inspire my design. So I think it's also a very beautiful phrase. And what about you, Yuri?
I have thank you for this question, by the way, because it helps me to understand who am I. And I'm the person who met two fantastic persons in my life. The one is my close friend, Alexander Brodsky, an artist. Of course, he is the most influential Russian architect and artist of today, and he's a friend of mine, which is mind-blowing because when I was a student, he was already a famous artist and he was working internationally. We were learning his drawings and his graphics and these Japan competitions he went. Now I understand that he completely shaped my understanding of what should be done and what's not. And he is not doing big buildings, he's not doing anything, almost nothing commercial. Like it was in the United States, like 60 years ago, anything but commercial. But I bring him in a commercial architecture. Now he's working for LSR developer and doing a building with pigeons on top, his sculptures. And this is one of the best buildings in Moscow. It's interesting that he can do even the big scale buildings. And this is quite a long story, I could talk a lot, but that he changed completely my perception of what the architecture is and what the context is, because he is not working with the beauty, he's transforming everything which is not considering like something nice into a piece of art and piece of architecture, being very humble and intellectual person. And being an artist. And the second person is Ram Koolhaus. It was a big experience of working with him on the program of Strelka Institute 2009-2010 and opening this program. And I spent 2 years with him in the courtyard of Strelka, which is quite a remarkable project of education, transforming the city and profession, I think. And I can compare this with Hutima School now, because it's also last around 12 years and now it's closed forever. And this time was very important for me to hear what he's saying, how he's talking, how he's working. And this is like completely different persons, but I'm somewhere in between, traveling.
Yeah, very inspiring. Unfortunately, I did not interview Brodsky, but I have a beautiful drawing in my collection that he did for me, because we shared a flight once from New York to Moscow. We were sitting next to each other. He also shares his birthday with my wife, who was born on May 9. I want to ask you, what are you preoccupied with right now? And what would you say is, what would you say your architecture is about?
I think this is really hard for me, really, to put these things into words. And I also feel very kind of immature in my way of thinking of architecture, like an architecture student. I just feel all the time, I'm still learning. I don't know anything about these things.
This is actually the biggest compliment, because sometimes I'm invited to student reviews, and the projects that are most mature, I dislike the most, because I can only compare them to real professional buildings. And that's not what I want to see from students. So if you as a professional say that you feel like a student, I think it's a great compliment, because you're still searching.
Suddenly it sounds good. but
because even Voltaire said that he would encourage, he would say, cherish those who are searching for the truth, but beware of those who find it. So I think it's very precise.
Well, maybe it has something to. I ended my lecture yesterday. There was a good question of what the dream project would be, and if that would be a preoccupation of ours right now. I think it's maybe looking for, or at least maybe not looking for, but identifying situations that force us to design things we didn't think we liked. So, for an example, we have been discussing a little bit of sustainability. For myself, I think it's an extremely important question, but I think it's an important and an interesting question out of an aesthetic point of view, because I think it asks for another aesthetic, and it asks for designing buildings. When we kind of draw them and you look at it, it's like, this doesn't look good. But it might be, the questions about sustainability might push us into an aesthetic which we didn't know about, but which we now have to shape into something nice. And I think that's quite interesting. I'm looking forward to, we just got a question for a project to renovate and enlarge an existing building, and in those projects that's always the case, because you already have a building, so you need to you need to adapt your design to it. You're not free to kind of choose how the full design will be. You have to be pragmatic, but still, of course, creating something, call it beautiful or attractive.
John.
I think it's the project at hand that preoccupies me at the time, and the questions change. But whatever kind of comes, the new project that comes on the desk is the one that becomes the obsession. One right now, we are working with a friend who wants to make a cabin in the woods that they want to make themselves. They are an industrial designer, so they're not a layperson, but at the same time, there's limitations to that process. And working with them, thinking through how to build a building it's larger than a hut. It's maybe 800-900 square feet, which I unfortunately do not know the meter conversion, but like a one-bedroom house, basically. And thinking through this context at which some of the design decisions or the ways we want to shape space, maybe it's easier to do that if the members are bigger, beams and posts, but then they're heavier. And then, so you're in this kind of conundrum where you're dealing with these constraints that are, at first glance, maybe in opposition to one's design intent, but design is not a tabula rasa, and actually what we're really excited by is getting to the point, we're not there yet, but getting to the point where we're able to let those two things not be in tension, but lead us to somewhere that is an unexpected design that we wouldn't get to otherwise.
Yuri?
We are busy now with kindergartens. And this is, it was our position in the field of Russian architecture, because after war starts, we understand that, of course, we're doing something commercial there because we still have an office there. But after I saw my son, because my son now is 7 years old, and my 7 last year was a research on myself. I understand who am I. And this was super interesting. I understand that my client is the child, as a kid, from, let's say, 0 to 6 or 7, and understanding the practice, what's happening with norms and even territory, which is not given to these kids, and that's why all of the kindergartens are 3-story high, and you cannot avoid this. You're doing something, and then you're doing 3 story building, and this is awful. And now we did 4 kindergartens, 1 private and few of them, 3 governmental, and those 3 are ugly because they are really ugly, but we did something, we did some improvements, and we understand that still we can do something for this. And we
So this are renovation projects, right?
No, it's new buildings, all of them new because it's quite a big field for architecture, and these public buildings, they are, everyone is, it was interesting talk before about developers. What developers are doing, they are saving money on children of that age. That's what they're doing, first of all. And my discussion is now with them, why you're doing this? I mean, it's small kids, and it's a pre-political education. I know what is that. It's most important time in their life to spend. I'm not sure that, of course, the team of people who is learning them, who are with them, it's much more important than architecture, where they are. But in the same time, if architecture matters, it matters there as well, at least. And now we are trying to talk with teachers, with psychologists. We're just opening that. And I decided to spend all the rest of my life for this research. It's not enough, I believe, but I will share everything. I will open publicly and very soon, because I think it's very urgent and really important topic for all of us.
Renzo Piana said, rationality doesn't sing, intuition does. I want to ask you if you could talk a little bit about your design process and where do you derive your ideas from? What inspires you?
Can I just instead just short comment on what you said, Yuri? I think it sounds fantastic. The kind of the scope to work for the. But I'm also, when you talk about it, I'm also thinking about for myself personally. I experienced it like that. I think that experiencing space you do as a very small child. You do it immediately, and you kind of. I still remember, experiencing. I think everyone does. You built yourself a small hut or something, and the experience of space was very strong. Was very, very strong, and I think for me, what is inspiring, if we talk about Leverance or whatever, to enter those spaces, those churches, but just as well. The other day, seeing the church outside of Yerevan here, that's to me that experience, that actually childlike experience of a space where you feel, where you have a kind of wow feeling. And that's very inspiring, and because I'm convinced it's not an experience you have only as an architect. It's not an experience that you were taught. I'm convinced that you have an experience. You like strong, nice spaces, or everyone experienced them. So I guess anytime you come on that kind of, and even outdoor spaces, that's very inspiring. Much, and then quite hard to kind of do again, to duplicate. But for me, that's inspiring.
So you avoided the question. John?
I think in our process, we're constantly going back and forth between our kind of proclivities or obsessions and the kind of the things we know we just like, and at the same time trying to find a rule set or a structure or something make the decisions for us that we can react to. And I think that that's not a totalizing process, but I think it's through the gathering of all of the constraints that come to each project and make it unique, and kind of you have that straitjacket of things you have to do, and out of that something unexpected happens, something that allows one's own agendas to then react and respond to it, and allows the kind of exceptions to prove the rule, and for one to make these odd and special and strange moments make sense somehow.
I can say that what inspires me now is our research program, because our tutorial runs the research program 2 years ago, exactly when the war starts. We decided not to close it, to open instead of shut it down. Now I'm now very much educated, because our curators and our researchers, we are talking every week, every Saturday is, it's a fairy tale of interesting ideas, readings, and now I understand that, of course, our problem, my personal problem, that of course, as we know, that there are two ways of architectural education. One is called the Beaux-Arts, which is where architect is the artist, technician, but mostly the artist. And there is a Northern Europe tradition, like from Switzerland or maybe from Germany, where architect is an engineer, and this is more about ethics, more about construction. So being part of this called the Beaux-Arts tradition. For me, and I had completely no humanitarian education, because we were only drawing, and it was about craft, not about thinking. And now, being relatively old, I'm opening for myself the world of ideas, and this is what helps me to find solutions, and how to merge design and research at the moment, and this is how it works.
And these ideas are not necessarily related to specific projects, right?
It's a program which is focusing mostly on the theory of architecture, and but every research is the project. It's a book, small book, and now we are planning to issue first books. There is a bit of delay with the first year, but it's our program. It's self-initiated program, which is good. We can do this or not. It's completely freedom inside, and we will publish these first ones, and it will be published also in English. We will send it to you for your review.
Okay. Let me ask you right now to maybe step outside of your personal careers and preoccupations right now, and maybe if you could stand back and reflect on the profession. What would you say are the most pressing issues right now? What kind of, what do you think architecture, do you think it's going in the right direction? Or do you disagree? Do you agree? Do you think that it's not pushing enough? What is it exactly that it's not pushing enough? How would you assess it or criticize it or celebrate it? And what's your opinion? Not necessarily in relation to your own projects.
I'll try not to avoid your question this time. But unfortunately, I will probably repeat myself, because I do think that the sustainability issue is very important, but I don't like where it's going at the moment, because it's very much a question of measuring things, and maybe not strange, because the first thing is about. Of course, about the energy status of a building, and you can measure that, and you can use technology to make the building better and so on. But I do think that it's the most important issue, and I would like to see more of the question of how that would, which spaces would be, and why not which shapes would be the actual maybe a little bit more sustainable spaces, or at least asking ourselves the question, what is a sustainable space? I think it's maybe easier in town planning because it comes down to very simple things of microclimate, working with water and working with greenery and so on, and which creates also very nice and livable spaces. But then also with architecture, I think that's where it should be going, and it's there is a lot of talk about sustainability, but it's not, as far as I'm concerned, right question, but wrong direction right now.
And maybe just to start, it would be maybe critical and important to use other words than sustainability to discuss sustainability. And I wonder how that would change the dynamics and deepen the conversation.
To quickly avoid the topic of sustainability, I think one mark of architecture at this moment is that there is no just one architecture at this moment. There's many projects. Like yesterday, seeing Abnormal's, your guys' presentation was spectacular. And in so many ways at a surface level, what we do and what you do are so different and maybe seemingly oppositional, different ends of the spectrum. But the fact that we're both doing these things that are different and just completely obsessed with it is fantastic. And I learned so much from that. And I think obviously once we get beyond the surface level, we, I think, share a lot of interests in narrative and imagination and in kind of creating the theater of what architecture actually does, not just the object itself. And so I think that right now there are many architectures, there are many agendas, and I think that it makes it interesting that we all don't have to be in the exact same conversation, recreating the exact same things over and over. Maybe to step back to this question of sustainability and obviously the larger kind of social, cultural, kind of ecological questions that architecture is trying to contend with at this moment. It's tough. These are big and real things, and I think right now maybe and kind of reflecting on some of our earlier conversations, there's a question of are these questions that architecture can solve? And as someone who's very much invested in also the built artifact of a building, maybe some of these questions are better solved through policy and planning and politics. Yet at the same time, architecture, can't just retreat from that conversation and pretend it doesn't exist. And so I think it's a really interesting question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if anyone does. Maybe if someone does, raise their hand. But how architecture can engage in that, but with the tools that we have in making buildings, and maybe proposing narratives and challenging the ways people think the world must exist right
now. It's a good question, but for me it's a little bit tricky because honestly I don't know what is the architecture. What do you mean by architecture? If it's a built environment or buildings built, it's okay. Because it depends where. And here we have good architecture, and everywhere we have architects who are doing good buildings around the world, and they are quite resisting the influence of development and let's say other things, but if it's an art or it's a craft, also everything is okay. And I'm not sure that it's an art, honestly. It's also one of the big questions of today, and that's why here, let's say, I would like to know more, but I know that here in Armenia, architectural education still is in tradition of École des Beaux-Arts. It's about creation, something, and it's about forms. And this is not about, let's say, I'm not saying, I mean education. And the same in Moscow, the same in, I'm not sure that the same in Italy, but maybe, I don't know. So, and architecture is always in the crisis, and it should be. And otherwise, we will sit and say everything is okay, or everything is not okay. I don't know what is not okay, because I've seen also the problem of communication, because I haven't seen a lot of the buildings. I've seen only pictures of them. And this is also the problem, because to be in the building, I've been in Alvarado house, I've seen tons of pictures of that, but being there in other buildings in Helsinki is completely opening for me another perspective on that. So I haven't been in millions of good buildings around the world, important buildings, not professional, maybe done by not professional architects, and this is also an architecture. So I would say that everything should be okay in general with architecture.
Yeah, sure. I really loved that framing of architecture is in crisis, and that's okay. And I think that you know, in a sense, architecture has always been in crisis. It's always asking questions of the time. And if there's ever a moment where architecture is not in crisis, maybe then we're in trouble.
Yeah. So maybe right now is a good time to talk a little bit about Yerevan. So you two came here for the first time. So I wonder what's your impressions of the city. And Yuri, of course, you know Yerevan very well. And you even have projects here, right? So what do you think is how would you describe the situation with some insights? How do you see the city without any insights? And would you say there is space for contemporary architecture in this city? You know, I just came here, you could say for the first time. I was actually here as a teenager, but I don't remember much. This was before I chose to go into architecture, so I was paying attention to very different signifiers. But now I have a kind of fresh impression, even though I was here, I think yesterday was the first day. I would compare it a little bit to Siena because of the color, because of the shape of the main square, which is not a square, of course, but it has a very similar shape, and it's empty in the middle. And so I actually asked this question, why is it empty? Because, you know, in most places it's not empty. In Siena, it is empty. It's for, you know, the actions. But the answer is that if you disagree with certain decisions, political decisions, you go to that square. And, you know, it's big enough to probably have space for every citizen. And this is just incredible. But the problem with that square is that it's finished. It's completely finished. And I just wonder, what's your opinion? How can the city grow if its main square is finished? You know, for me as a New Yorker, that's an absurd idea. I mean, how can you finish a square? You just take a building down and you build another one. But here it's impossible. So I just wonder, what are your ideas about, you know, coming out of this impossible situation, and what are your impressions of the city?
Two questions there, no? The first one was easier, I think. I really, this is my first time in Yerevan. I'm kind of in love with the city. I think it's I really like the city. It's I don't know if the best way for me to describe it is that it to me it seems to be an extremely friendly city, one of the friendliest cities I've been in. And then why that is, I don't know, but there's something very interesting which surprised me, because both the city planning and much of the architecture is shaped out of dogmatic ideas. And from my prejudice, that should be a problem. It wouldn't produce, I would have thought it wouldn't produce spaces where which you like, which are where you don't feel that you're in a kind of dogmatic or at least static place. It would be a problem, but it's not, and I'm just very surprised by that. And then we're walking around and seeing these buildings, newer and older, of different kind of quality of architecture, let's say. But then you have in so many of them this material, the tufo stone, which was so beautifully explained to us, is originally when you build a building, you start digging, and that's the stone you find on the site, and of course then you build a building out of it. But it's not any stone. It has a very strong character, and you see that coming from outside. It's just a fantastic material, and so you can clad. I have the feeling you can clad any kind of architecture with that stone, and it's going to have a certain feeling of presence and quality somehow. I don't know if it's because of that, but and then talking about the square not being finished. The only thing I know, the only thing I can comment on with that square is that whenever we pass at any time of the day, also in the middle of the night, there are a lot of people there. And they're not there to, they're not there for a manifestation. They're not there to parade. They're not there to kind of fulfill some kind of idea about this very, very strong shaped square. They're living their lives. They're passing. They're meeting. I'm quite amazed, as you hear. I'm quite amazed by Yerevan. Very nice city.
Yeah, for years I've lived in the Boston area for 16 years or so, and for years I've been going to Watertown, which is kind of home of a very large Armenian American community, and really great grocery stores, really great restaurants, just lovely people. And I've always been curious of coming here, and so it's just such an amazing opportunity to finally make it, and also to put a place to all the names I see and on all the places and the pictures that are in the restaurants. But coming to this city I completely agree, and I feel like this might be a kind of moment where we're just all yes-anding in the best sense, because this is such a lovely city, and just our time here, coming and seeing the full spectrum, or a full spectrum, by no means the full spectrum, but it just feels like a place where there's spaces like this in the middle of the city where we can gather, and I have a little bit of FOMO from our context in Boston, where there's really no extra space left over in the same way that one can just create your own community in that sense. Like we visited the Library for Architecture earlier this week, and a space like that is so special. And I think that that's something that's also very makes me very hopeful for this moment, is the fact of this conference here and the people who organized it. And there's an architecture community that cares about the city, they care about architecture, they care about the place they're from, and there's an opportunity to create culture and kind of really be at the ground floor of that and be at the ground floor of change. And of course, the reality of city and politics and bureaucracy, it's tough, but it does give me hope that good things are coming and will continue.
I'm actually surprised about your very timid complimentary responses. I interviewed the architects from, I guess, older generations. They usually come to a new city with big plans already drawn up, with big, ambitious proposals. What really needs to happen there? You know, you need a big avenue here, you need a big skyscraper there. When a competition was held for Ochter Center, and which eventually became, what's the name? Gazprom Tower, yeah, which was actually built. The architects who were invited to be on the jury, they actually disagreed with the initial statement. They actually disagreed with the brief of the competition, and they all came to protest and walk out of the jury. And when they did, and when they refused to judge the competition, they actually engaged the local governor with their own horizontal solutions. And it's incredible. I'm talking about people like Norman Foster and Kurakawa. And it's incredible that they came all prepared. And I just curious, what are your suggestions? Maybe you lack the context, maybe you lack the insights. But wouldn't you? I mean, it's just a talk. We're just discussing ideas. What would you recommend? What would you suggest here? And now you have the insights. What do you think? Going back to my question, do you think there is space for contemporary architecture here? What kind of role would you play as an outsider, an insider? And so what would you do? Well, what would you do about that square? What would you do about the city? How would you modernize it? How would you leave a trace? Is there a trace from 2020s?
Thank you for this question. It's not easy one. And I would start with the story of St. Petersburg competition, because I was a part of that. I wasn't in the jury, but I was watching all the time what's happening there. And I was a part of this protesting group. And what I understand that half of the star architects decided to write a sort of letter to governor, and they refused to be part of the competition, and they refused to be part of jury. Other half, which is much bigger, they agreed to take part in the competition, and they did quite awful projects, I think. And others been in a jury, and they choose exactly what Gazprom wants. And this is also interesting experience. It's not, let's say, something we could describe as an ethical win or some, I don't know how to say that, but something good or bad. It shows us that commercial architecture and this powerful client who is really powerful in the city. And my feeling was that they would do a lot of more good things with that budget for the city, not building the headquarters. I don't know what, but it's and what they're doing now, because society kicked them off from the center to the periphery, and now they are building in the water, if you know, with the same architect, spiral, not efficient, ego-shaped, I don't know what, open bottle, 500 meters high, something from the water. And they're doing this. I don't know, maybe now they stop it, but it was announced as the ready project already. And talking about Yerevan, it's also, I don't know a lot, but what I know that it's, of course, it's a fantastic utopian city from one stone. It's a sculpture done 100 years ago. And this is, I don't think that we can find another city like that. Of course, we could find in Italy 600 years ago cities like that, building in the plan, and we have others building in 60, like Brasilia. It's completely not that. And now I think the most challenging thing is that a city lacks regulations, not the architect. Of course, it's a place for everywhere is the place for good contemporary architecture. It can be everywhere. But here it's the problem of regulation, and of course the most important thing is the same as Gazprom, is the ego of developers. And it's about density and heights. If someone could put on certain area the height of, let's say, 70 or 60 meters, that would be very much appreciated. This is so simple, and this is not happening. That's why if, I know that the same now is happening in Moscow, you can build 200 meters everywhere. I mean, almost everywhere. There is a small spot in the center of city where you cannot do this, and a huge territory where you can do this. This is completely transforming the city, and nobody is asking what society wants, what people think. That maybe they don't want to live in high-rise buildings. Maybe they want to live in, let's say, at least 50 meters high building, or less, let's say, it could be less collective, because skyscraper is expensive, and this is quite specific thing. And personally, I wouldn't live in the skyscraper, specifically here or there. And this is also transportation, also everything which can be regulated here is much more needed than architecture. And architects will come and they will do what they can do. And even boring architecture is good. I wouldn't say that we should have a spectacular architecture everywhere or remarkable architecture. Just as an infrastructure, it can be done quite well. And these sustainable ideas, others, it's important. But I would say that the most important thing is the regulation here.
So, let me ask: do we have time for one more question, or should we go to the next panel? So yeah, you already answered. So one question, one last question I would ask: what do you think is a good building? And answers like, I don't know, I would not accept.
I guess I'll take up that question. I've been lucky in the middle, having time to think this whole time. I think a good building, what is it? I think to earnestly answer, it really depends on the question you're asking of the building. Like there's many,
what is a good building?
Many good buildings in different contexts. Like there's the questions that the building is asking or addressing through its very creation. Is it doing those things well? Is it doing those things? Maybe first and foremost, is it doing it well? Is it not leaking? Is it when we talk about sustainability, like is it functioning as it should? But beyond that, maybe it's not what is a good building, but maybe what is an interesting building. There are plenty of good buildings. They're boring. That's fine, and maybe that's actually the point. But is the kind of act of the building and the process behind it, is there an engagement with something more than just the fact of the engineering of the structure? And I think buildings, I wouldn't necessarily say all good buildings, but interesting buildings to me are ones where there's a mark of authorship, not necessarily an individual authorship by any means. So many buildings are constructed by large teams of people, but are they trying to do something? Like, did they take a risk?
But would you say it's a requirement that in order to call a building a good building, that it has to be, it has to respond to all the functions, for example?
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. I mean, obviously, like Frank Lloyd Wright, very famous architect for his great and spectacular buildings, many of which leave. I think there is always, there is a dialogue, and sometimes when you press things beyond what is typical, you take risks in the act of construction as well, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But at a kind of basic level, I think as an architect who wants to make physical buildings that people live in, I take that responsibility seriously, and I would like to make things that people enjoy being in, that have thermal comfort and delight.
If I translate what you're saying to, for example, regarding a person, you're basically saying that a person can be a good person if, well, first of all, he has to be a professional.
Say more.
You just said that a building, it could be interesting, right? But first it has to be, in order to call it a good building, it has to perform all the functions, but then it has to have something extra. So you can also extrapolate that on a person. You can say that, somebody is a good person, but he may be a lousy professional. It's not actually always related.
No,
and I wonder if for you, this has to be related. A good building, would you never call a good building if it has some failures?
No, I mean, I think that maybe to backtrack ever so much, I think that there are interesting buildings that fail. But I think fundamentally, it's nice to make something that works.
Yeah. Then it becomes a nice building.
But sometimes nice isn't always interesting. So,
what do you think?
I don't know. I wanted it. It's not a very precise word, but I was thinking, if you ask what is a good building, to me, a good building has to have smartness. Call it smartness. That you have the feeling, and it can be, of course, what is smartness? You might ask, man. It's just, I think, what you feel. I think even we could, if you want to have another word instead of sustainability, we could talk about smartness. A high rise, most high rises are really not smart buildings. Usually there is really zero smartness in a high rise, which doesn't mean that, there could be a reason to build a high rise, but usually not so much smartness. And then I'd say, connecting to the sustainability issue, maybe it's not so smart to use an excessive amount of material when you could have used less. And then coming back though to, I'm really, to me, smartness in this case is not something you can it's not a question of engineering. Yeah, so smartness is also definitely in the aesthetics, but very much in how the space is organized. So it's very much a kind of an architectural issue. A little bit vague to say smartness, but I think that, for me at least, if you ask what is a good building, I would say it has to have the aspect of smartness.
I actually like what you said yesterday. One of the words you mentioned was playful. And in the beginning of this conversation, you said magical. So I think that would make a good building, those two descriptions. And, if it fails on many other levels, I would still call it a good building. And what about you?
Interestingly enough, I have several answers. I'll be very fast. One is that maybe this building should give something to the city, literally, and you can evaluate this. If it's giving a sort of small green space or public space or cafe, whatever, not extract everything from the city and to be a closed entity. And you can measure what? Even a facade can be a gift to the city if it's well done, at least. The second thing is that potentially every building can be a piece of theoretical architecture. I mean that theory can be embedded explicitly a part of that building. And then you can read this, and this is the contribution to the architecture itself. And maybe I'm not saying to the history of architecture, but to the language of architecture. And the last thing, it can be a public building, thinking about this kindergartens and that type of buildings. Of course, residential matters, but I think the most challenging thing in the post-Soviet countries and everywhere here is how to make cheap, good. And here there are some fantastic new public buildings done by local architects and international architects. This is very much remarkable.
Thank you. Thank you.